Hey there, survivors. Thanks for tuning in to tonight's episode. If you're new here, please consider subscribing. It really helps me keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get started. I didn't sign up to be a hero. Nobody does. Not out here, not anymore. I signed a 2-week contract because I needed the rations, hazard pay, fuel credits, a clean water bonus, and enough food stamps to keep my family inside the fence for another month. That was the deal. Escort a salvage team into the Deadlands, pick up an old black box from a downed chopper, bring it back to West Ridge Recovery Sector. In and out. No combat, no infected. Just a retrieval job in a sector the brass swore had been dormant for years. Quiet as a grave, they said. They always say that. The virus was supposed to be gone from that region. No signals, no confirmed movement. Nothing alive, nothing undead. Just sun-bleached asphalt and rusted-out vehicles. Bones of the outbreak scattered across the divide. Everyone who goes out there tells the same story. They saw nothing, heard nothing, came back to collect their pay and move on. Then I saw the convoy manifest. 4 soldiers, 1 scout, 2 drivers, and me. Classified as tech extraction, even though I'd never pulled a black box in my life. Most of my work was in radio towers, patching up half-melted transmitters in heat-blasted towns. But someone stamped my file with qualified, and that was enough for command. I think they just needed a name on the line. We rolled out at 0600 hours from Outpost 11, past the new greenbelt fences, down through the erosion zones where the earth split open after the fires. By 0800, the trees started to thin. Not because of weather, because nothing grows where bodies were burned by the tens of thousands. The land remembers, even if the rest of us pretend not to. The scout rode ahead on a 2-wheeler, scanning for sinkholes or leftover mines. The roads were mostly clear, only cracked and swallowed in places where time did its job. No infected, no stragglers, just emptiness. That's the thing nobody tells you about the dead zones, how quiet they are. You start wondering if silence is worse than screams. Staff Sergeant Ellman rode up front, one hand always resting on the dash, the other on the grip of his rifle. He didn't talk much. None of them did. The squad was part of a newer rotation, soldiers too young to remember the outbreak, too trained to show nerves. The kind of people who get sent on jobs that don't officially exist. By the time we reached the outer marker at Sector 6, the light had changed. No real clouds, just a haze that didn't move. Sunlight came through it in strips, like it was pushing past smoke that never cleared. The air was dry enough to peel skin, and still there were tracks, old ones but human, maybe a week old. Ellman looked at them, said nothing, and waved us on. We made camp in the shell of a truck stop. No roof, no doors, just bent beams and asphalt sunk in like a bowl. The others stayed in the vehicles. I set up inside, where the wall still had part of a map pinned behind broken glass. The routes were outdated. Most of those roads had caved or vanished, but I traced our path anyway, running a finger along the faded red line leading east. That night, something passed through the trees behind us. Didn't stop, didn't come close, but it moved without stumbling. I didn't wake anyone. Just kept the safety off my carbine and counted the minutes until dawn. By 0500, we were moving again. The crash site was supposed to be another 12 miles, but we hit a blockage near the old drainage culverts, cement tunnels that had once fed runoff from the freeway. The scout's voice came through short and clipped. Movement up a ridge, not infected. Human, not responding to signal. Ellman held up a fist and everything stopped. We dismounted. The hum of the engine cut off, and that silence returned, the kind that doesn't just fill your ears but climbs down your spine. I followed the squad through overgrowth tall enough to hide a truck. The road had been overtaken by thornbush and wiregrass, and the only thing still visible was a rusted mile marker, tilted sideways. Exit 207A, it read, pointing into nowhere. The movement turned out to be nothing, or maybe not nothing, just gone. A small fire pit, ashes warm, a half-eaten ration brick. Someone had been there less than a day ago. Ellman ordered no pursuit. We weren't here for missing scavengers. We had coordinates. We had a job. At 0900, the wreck came into view. The chopper had gone down sideways, the tail bent like a broken leg, half buried in rockslide. No explosion, no fire, just mechanical death. The fuselage was intact, the cockpit was empty, no crew, no blood. We circled the site. Nothing moved. Elman gave the all clear, and I went in first. The interior stank of old insulation and sun-baked oil. The black box housing was where it should be, bolted behind the co-pilot seat. I powered up my reader, checked for beacon pulses. The signal was weak, but present. Then something ticked behind the wall paneling. It wasn't loud, just a tap, then another, like someone rapping a coin against aluminum. I froze, not out of fear, out of calculation. I listened, counted, waited. No response. So I finished the removal, pulled the unit, slipped it into the foam case and bolted it shut. When I turned around, one of the soldiers was watching me from the hatch. Her name was Traeger. Young, quiet. But her hand had moved to her sidearm. I nodded once. She didn't lower it. We left together. By 1300 hours, we were rolling again. I don't know why, but I kept the reader on, maybe out of habit. Maybe because that tapping didn't sit right with me. As the convoy bounced down what used to be Route 89, the reader pinged. Once, then again. Short bursts. I looked at the display. It was coming from behind us. And then, from the same direction, the scout's voice. Contact. Multiple. Not living. We stopped. The feed went to static. Elman stepped out. I stayed in the back, hand hovering over the emergency panel. I could see the dust rising behind us, but not what caused it. Then came the shape. Not running, not charging, just walking. Dragging limbs, open jaws, the standard profile. But behind the first wave were more. Dozens. Then more. We reversed. Fast. The trucks kicked gravel and spun half a turn before catching the path. But the horde wasn't following directly. It was herding. Pushing us. Angling toward the culverts we'd passed earlier. Elman barked orders. North path. No returns. The driver took a hard right up a service trail barely wide enough for the vehicle. We took branches to the windshield. I held onto the black box with both hands and didn't speak. When we reached the top, we looked down into the drainage zone, and I saw what they meant. The infected weren't chasing. They were corralling, like a slow net closing in. Something I hadn't seen before. Something that didn't fit the old reports. The spread wasn't random. It was timed, or worse, guided. Not by intelligence, not in the way humans lead or coordinate, but something simpler. Repetition, maybe. Patterns drilled into muscle and bone through decades of nothing but instinct. Or maybe just the terrain, funneling them like cattle through the places no one patrols anymore. We didn't debate it. Didn't try to rationalize what we'd seen. Elman ordered us east, off-map territory, but drier ground. We left the marked highway and cut along a service track that hadn't seen wheels in years. Tires kicked up grey dust, revealing bones in the soil. Deer maybe, dogs, possibly worse. None of us asked. The only noise came from the convoy's rattling suspension and the occasional click of someone checking their weapon out of habit. I sat in the back with the black box resting on a folded tarp beside me. It vibrated faintly with the motion of the truck, the casing still warm from extraction. I hadn't turned the reader off. The beacon continued pulsing, though weaker now. The signal had started to shift between two distinct ranges, one steady, one erratic. It wasn't mechanical interference, I'd seen that before. This was cleaner, like something was piggybacking the original transmission. Echoing it, maybe. I told myself it didn't matter. Our job was to get it home, not analyze it. But something about that second signal kept me from closing the lid. By 1500 hours, we hadn't seen infected in nearly 3 hours. The horizon ahead dipped into old farmland, overgrown and sunburnt, the kind of territory that never recovered. Scattered ruins of greenhouses and irrigation towers stuck out of the earth like bones. We passed a collapsed grain silo on its side. The word feed faded to rust-red streaks. No birds, no rodents. Nothing alive that I could see. We stopped only when we reached a point where the trail dipped too sharply for the lead truck to descend safely. Elman had the scout dismount and head up the ridge on foot. He gave no command to secure the area, which was the first time that day he'd broken procedure. That made me more nervous than anything else. While the others set up a loose perimeter, I moved the black box to a shaded patch beneath the half roof of what looked like an old storage shack. The door was gone, but the foundation was intact and the air inside was slightly cooler. I rigged the power cell to the reader again and watched the pulse rates. The secondary signal had drifted higher now, more frequent, almost as if responding to proximity. I unplugged the reader. Traeger stood near the far wall, watching me. She'd been watching since we left the crash site. Not in a hostile way, just studying, waiting. Her hand rested on the grip of her sidearm. She hadn't drawn it, not yet. "I don't know what you think that thing does," she said quietly without looking directly at me, "but whatever you woke up, it's following." I didn't answer. There was no use pretending I hadn't noticed the same thing. The pattern was there. A curve, not a chase. The infected weren't moving for food. They were moving for something else. And we might have brought it with us. At 1600, the scout hadn't returned. Elman sent 2 others after him. No radio response, just a check and return order. Standard protocol. I stayed behind with Traeger and the drivers. The sun dropped low enough to cast shadows across the wrecked fields. The breeze picked up, carrying a dry, metallic scent. Not rot, not decomposition, something else. Like burnt circuitry and ozone. It made my tongue itch. Then came the gunshot, sharp, singular, followed by nothing. We froze, all of us. Elman stared uphill, one hand gripping his rifle, the other pressed to his ear, listening to dead air. The second shot came 10 seconds later, then silence again. The squad broke formation, moved in without waiting for orders. Elman hesitated, just long enough for me to see the twitch in his jaw, the calculation. If they didn't come back, we weren't going up there. Traeger looked at me again. "That was a warning shot," she said. "You ever heard a warning shot that wasn't followed by shouting?" No one replied. The sun dipped further. Temperature dropped fast. Too fast. I felt the change like the shift in a sealed room when someone opens a freezer, cold and sudden. The wind kicked through the tall grass, and with it came sound. Not footsteps, not groaning. Something softer. A low hum, almost electronic, but wrong. Like speakers vibrating on an old loop. It didn't seem to come from any direction, just everywhere at once. One of the drivers, a young guy named Locke, turned in a full circle, then dropped to one knee. "What is that?" he asked. No one answered. Traeger raised her rifle and sighted into the grass. She didn't fire, but I saw her jaw tense, fingers curl. "I see movement," she muttered. Elman grabbed his radio. "All teams return to point 0. Fall back to vehicles. Immediate." No response. The grass moved, not with wind, with pressure. Something pushed through it low and fast, then vanished again. Locke backed up toward the shack. "Sarge?" Elman raised a hand. "Hold position. Wait for visual." We got one. The first infected broke the brush line in a crawl. Its body was twisted, spine bent backward, one leg dragging uselessly. It wasn't charging. It was crawling like an animal, eyes wide open, mouth closed, silent. Then another came behind it, standing arms slack, covered in something like ash, and then 6 more, a dozen, all of them just watching, not attacking, watching. The silence was worse than any noise they could have made. Elman raised his rifle. "Fire on my mark." Still the infected didn't move. They stood in formation, too loose to be military, but too even to be random. Then one lifted its head and let out a sound that didn't belong in a human throat. A short, sharp click, and every single one of them turned at once. They didn't run. They walked, in perfect unison around us, not at us. Around, like a net. I don't remember shouting. I only remember moving. Traeger shoved me toward the shack. Elman opened fire. The others joined in, but none of the infected reacted to bullets. Not like before. They didn't flinch. They didn't charge. They just kept walking, around us, forming a ring. Not to attack, to contain. Traeger grabbed my collar and pulled me through the side entrance. "We're not getting out of this if we wait," she said. I nodded. I didn't ask where the others went. I didn't ask if they were still alive. We crawled out through a collapsed portion of the wall at the back. The grass was thicker there, tangled with bramble. It tore at my sleeves, caught the hem of my pants, but I didn't stop. Traeger moved ahead, clearing with her bayonet. No shots, no shouts, just wind and clicking sounds, fainter now, like the infected were moving again, somewhere behind us. We kept low, kept moving, no light, no radio. Eventually we reached an old storm drain, rusted out, half collapsed, but wide enough to fit through. Traeger dropped in first, I followed. Inside it was pitch black. The air hung thick with mold and rot. Our boots splashed through shallow water that reeked of rusted copper and long dead things. The tunnel narrowed and twisted, splitting off in angles that didn't make sense. I lost track of time. We followed the curve of the pipe until it dropped into a junction chamber, a concrete dome barely taller than our heads, where the moisture dripped in slow, steady beats that sounded louder than gunfire in that enclosed space. I tried not to breathe through my nose. Every inhale tasted like mildew and corrosion. Traeger pressed herself against the wall, rifle aimed up at the vertical shaft above. I sat with my back to the opposite side, fingers still looped through the case handle, knuckles white. We didn't speak. There was nothing useful to say. Her face was unreadable in the dark, but I could tell she was listening for something, waiting. Her body barely moved. Only her fingers twitched every now and then, running over the fabric of her belt or the steel of the bayonet sheath like she was keeping a mental inventory of every tool she had left. I focused on the same: pockets, knife, radio, dead, water flask, half full, no food. The black box, warm against my back, pulsed every few seconds, its internal charge meter still green. I considered smashing it against the wall and leaving the pieces behind. But the thought passed. That thing had drawn them somehow. It might be the only reason I was still alive, like some grotesque kind of insurance, bait with value. After what felt like an hour, we moved again. Not because it was safe, but because staying still had become worse. Traeger climbed the rungs of the corroded ladder in the chamber's far corner and forced open the rusted manhole cover. It took both of us, pushing from below, to shift the weight. We came up inside the remains of what used to be a park restroom, tiles cracked, mirror shattered, graffiti in languages I didn't recognize. The ceiling had caved, giving us an exit point through the collapsed roof and into the remains of an overgrown courtyard. Above ground again, the world looked bleached, pale, as if the light didn't belong anymore. The trees were dead, their bark stripped by wind and decay. The grass had grown tall but colorless, a washed-out yellow-gray. There were birds, but they didn't sing, just circled high in the clouds like they knew what was waiting below. We headed east. No compass, no GPS, just the sun and the slope of the land. Traeger said nothing for a long time, just kept walking with the same steady pace, rifle tight to her shoulder, eyes scanning left and right. I didn't ask where we were going. I didn't know. I think she did though, or at least acted like she did. And that was enough for me. By mid-afternoon we passed what had once been a gas station. The sign was still there, faded and bent, the word Mart barely hanging on by a single bracket. The windows were all blown out. Inside, the shelves were stripped bare, the floor covered in dust and rodent tracks. I found a half-empty can of powdered drink mix under the counter and stuffed it into my pack. No one had been here in years, but someone had bled here recently. Not a smear or spatter, just a single handprint on the glass of the freezer door, too clean to be old. Traeger noticed it too. She didn't say a word, just touched her fingers to the print, then drew her knife and kept it in hand as we left. Neither of us spoke until the building was out of sight. Around 1600 we saw a shape on the road ahead, not moving, a pile like clothing. As we got closer, I realized it was a person, dead. Curled up, hands still tucked beneath the chest like he'd died trying to sleep. No bites, no blood, just gaunt and dry, like he'd starved right there. I checked the pockets, nothing. Traeger didn't stop. She just said, "Keep moving, this place is a grave." We walked until the light started to change, not a sunset, just a shift in tone. The clouds grew denser, the wind picked up. In the distance we could hear the low rumble of something metallic. Maybe a generator, maybe not. Traeger slowed near a burned-out car wreck and crouched behind it, signaling me to do the same. Ahead, about 100 yards down the road, we saw them. 4 figures, human. 2 armed, rifles slung. The other 2 were dragging something, hard to see what. A body maybe, or supplies. They weren't in uniform. No patches, no markings. One wore a gas mask, though the filters looked dry-rotted. The others had hoods or cloth wrapped around their faces. "They see us?" I asked quietly. "No," she said, "but if they do, it won't be a conversation." I nodded and stayed low. We watched as the group paused at the mouth of a service tunnel, one of the old fuel lines from back when this sector had refueling stations for convoys. They disappeared inside. Traeger waited another 2 minutes before she rose. "We cut east," she said. "No lights, no noise, just get out of range." I followed. We stuck to the tree line, ducking behind fallen branches and old highway markers covered in soot. The black box on my back had gone quiet. The pulse had stopped. I didn't check why. I didn't want to. Eventually we reached a culvert, a narrow one, dry and filled with debris but still passable. Traeger checked the edge, then motioned me in. We used it to crawl under what used to be a rail line. The iron had warped from heat, the ties half melted. No trains had passed this way in a decade or more. Still, I flinched as we moved under it, like something might roar past at any second. We came out into a grove of trees where the earth had cracked open from some long-ago quake. The trench was deep, maybe 20 feet, jagged with roots and collapsed dirt. We camped just off the edge, behind a veil of hanging brush. The air here smelled different, damp, earthy, less like rot, more like waiting. We didn't make a fire. We didn't speak. We rationed water, ate nothing. I watched the black box again. The screen was dark now. The charge indicator had dropped halfway, but the beacon was no longer flashing. Traeger glanced at it, then at me. "Leave it," she said. "It's not worth carrying anymore." "It's the only reason we were sent," I said, "and it's the only reason they found us." I didn't argue. I just tucked it back into the pack. Maybe I should have left it right there. Maybe I will, but not yet. That night, I tried to sleep. Traeger took the first watch. I lay down with my back to the slope, knees tucked. The wind shifted sometime around midnight. I smelled something new. Smoke, faint, distant. Not burning wood, not fuel, something synthetic. Plastics, rubber, old paint. I sat up. Traeger was already alert, eyes locked on the far ridge. "I see fire," she said. I didn't at first. Then the glow reached the clouds, orange against grey, flickering fast. Too fast to be a signal fire, too big to be an accident. "Camp?" I asked. She shook her head. "Someone's burning bodies." We watched in silence. The fire didn't spread, didn't flicker out, just pulsed like it was breathing. But something about it was wrong, too contained for a wildfire, too erratic to be a controlled burn. The color of it shifted unnaturally, from dull orange to white-hot bursts, and then back again. Traeger didn't lower her rifle the entire time. Her eyes tracked every flicker on the horizon, like she was waiting for something to step out of that glow and walk toward us. Then the clicking came again. It was just to the left, behind the slope, maybe no more than 20 feet back. Quiet, but unmistakable. Not the hard clatter of metal, something softer. Organic, bone against teeth. That's what it sounded like. I didn't turn my head. I didn't want to look. The temptation to move, to check, was there, but some old instinct told me not to shift weight, not to break the line of my silhouette. Traeger didn't flinch, didn't whisper. She just slowly pressed the barrel of her rifle to the ground, brought her knife out in a smooth, practiced motion, and crouched lower. Whatever she saw in my face must have matched what she felt in the air, because she didn't ask questions. She just nodded once and moved. We slid downhill through the trench, using the roots for support, moving slow to avoid dislodging loose rock. The clicking stopped as soon as we dipped out of sight. No chase, no footsteps. Just a sudden, complete silence, like someone had closed a door behind us. The dirt beneath our boots grew softer, wetter. A marsh had formed at the base of the trench, fed by an old runoff pipe that was still trickling brown water from some unknown source. We crossed it on a half-buried metal beam. I slipped once, caught myself with one hand, and kept moving. Traeger led us away from the fire, not toward it. I didn't argue. Every instinct screamed to put distance between us and that pulsing light. Whatever was burning out there, it wasn't done yet. As we hiked further east, the landscape began to change again. Fewer dead trees, more skeletal remains of buildings, small ones, outposts maybe. Some built from old cargo containers, others just reinforced sheds, abandoned most likely, but not destroyed. That was the strange part. The dead zones had a reputation. If something stood too long, the infected would eventually tear it down. Yet these places still had roofs, sometimes even intact windows. We reached one by midday. The sun was pale overhead, casting no warmth. The building had once been a way station or comm relay, solar panels on the roof, a reinforced steel door, faded lettering on the side in peeling paint. Sector Line Station 4D. The door was slightly ajar. Traeger gestured for silence, then moved in first. Inside, the air was dry, cold, no signs of recent use, dust undisturbed. The floor was concrete, cracked and buckled in places, but clean. That was the part that stuck out. No debris, no animal tracks, no scattered gear. Just an empty chair at a dead terminal and a wall-mounted map of the surrounding sectors. I checked the drawers. Nothing but faded supply tags, some loose wiring, a cracked pair of binoculars. Traeger found a power unit still humming behind a panel, barely functional, but it meant we could recharge our gear, if only for a few minutes. We took turns keeping watch. I plugged the black box into the outlet using my adapter cable. For a moment, it didn't respond. Then, slowly, the display came back online. The beacon light blinked once, then again. Steady. But a second light, buried deeper in the diagnostics menu, began to flicker in sync. It hadn't been there before. I tapped through the screens. The reader didn't label the second source. It just mirrored the first, same pulse rate, same signal duration, but slightly out of phase, like an echo. Traeger stepped up beside me. "What's it doing?" I hesitated before answering. "It's repeating, from somewhere nearby, not from us." Her brow furrowed. "Another black box, or something built to imitate one." We didn't stay long. The building gave me the same feeling as the infected at the crash site. Not dangerous, not aggressive, just wrong. A place that should have decayed, but hadn't. We left the same way we came, closing the door behind us out of habit. By late afternoon, we reached a valley cut by an old aqueduct. The concrete had crumbled in places, creating natural steps down to the flatbed below. Water still trickled along the bottom, shallow and green. The air was warmer here, the wind less constant. We found a collapsed rail bridge overhead and decided to rest beneath it. The shadows cast by the broken beams gave enough cover without boxing us in. Traeger took out a folded scrap of old cartography, military issue, pre-reclamation. She tapped a point with her knife. "There's a supply depot, or what used to be one, about 6 miles east. If the maps are right, it's above flood level. If it's dry, we stay the night. If not, we move on." I nodded. "And if someone's already there?" "Then we hope they're friendly. And if they're not, we deal with it." We set out again. The terrain became more industrial, old pipelines snaking through the hills, weathered signposts covered in grime, warning markers half swallowed by the ground. The road had long since collapsed, but the slope gave us an elevated view of what lay ahead. That's when we saw it, the depot. It looked intact, square concrete walls, no visible breach. The surrounding fence had fallen, but the structure itself stood strong. A large double-door bay in front, solar panels on the roof, a small tower on the side, likely a signal relay or spotter's post, but no movement, no guards, no lights. We circled wide before approaching. Traeger checked the corners while I stayed low, watching the windows. No glass, just steel grates. The place had been fortified but abandoned. We found a breach in the fence and moved through quietly. The depot's front doors were locked but not reinforced. Traeger used her pry bar and brute strength to force one open with a sharp metallic groan that echoed through the empty lot. Inside, the space was cavernous. Rows of empty shelves, a few broken pallets, some plastic barrels. No recent footprints, no signs of conflict, But there was dust, thick enough to coat the floor, yet broken in small patches, like something had crawled instead of walked. We searched the upper level first, a few empty offices, some filing cabinets that had long since rusted shut. Then the tower. Inside, we found what had once been a control room, a battered radio array, dead screens, and a collapsed ceiling tile that had crushed the chair. But near the wall, beside the window, sat a single item untouched by time, a field journal, leather-bound, clean. The kind of clean that doesn't happen by accident. No dust on the cover, corners sharp, no moisture warping the paper. Traeger didn't like it. She brushed the back of her hand across the spine as if expecting it to shift or stick. When nothing happened, she opened it, carefully. Inside were pages of tight writing, all in the same hand, as if someone had written it all at once, no corrections, no second guessing. Most of it described the early days of the station, rotations, patrol logs, shift changes. But then the tone changed. Around page 20, the entries became erratic, times scratched out, locations without context. One entry noted a loss of comms. Another described lights flickering on in the sub-levels during hours when the generators weren't powered. Then came the line that stuck with me most. They aren't moving like the others. They wait for attention. When you look away, they shift. Traeger closed the book after that. We didn't say much, but we both glanced toward the far end of the depot, where the floor sloped down to a reinforced hatch marked Cold Storage, Sub-A. The label was barely legible, paint faded to the color of dried bone. We descended slowly. The stairwell beyond the hatch was intact, though the overhead lighting was long dead. We moved by the dim shine of Traeger's wrist lamp, its red filter casting everything in low, meaty tones. The air grew colder the further we went, not fresh, but still breathable. The smell changed too, not rot, not infection, more like old refrigeration coils mixed with wet stone, a manufactured cold that had outlived its purpose. At the bottom of the stairs, the hallway split in two. Left led toward the storage wing, rows of sealed doors, many with old security seals still intact. To the right, the corridor ended in what appeared to be a blast door. Above it, a light flickered slowly, not powered by anything we could see, just pulsing, one blink every 5 seconds. On, off, on. The moment Traeger stepped toward it, the black box in my pack pulsed. Not mechanically, it throbbed. I felt it through the straps like something inside had shifted. I unbuckled and set it down. The display had come on. No input, no power, just active. A message appeared on screen. Receiving, nothing else. Traeger stood over it, blade drawn. What is it receiving? I shook my head. It's not labeled. Could be anything, a stored message, echo data, or a new signal. From down here? Maybe. We didn't have time to debate it. The pulse light above the blast door sped up. 1 second intervals, then half second, then it froze, permanently on. The door began to open. There was no power source, no sound of hydraulics, just movement, slow, heavy, deliberate. The seal cracked, and a gust of colder air washed over us. Traeger dropped to a crouch, weapon raised. I pulled the box back and kept low, bracing for something, anything, to emerge. But the room beyond was empty. A circular chamber, wide enough for a vehicle to turn. The walls were lined with dead monitors. A few had broken glass. A table sat in the center, metal legs bolted to the concrete. On it lay a second black box, nearly identical to mine, but this one was open. The casing fractured. Inside was something else, something not mechanical. It looked like preserved tissue, vascular, still wet. Traeger approached it slowly. She never lowered her weapon. What am I looking at? I stepped up beside her and peered inside. The shape was irregular, dense clusters of fibrous strands pulsing faintly, like muscle but darker. Wires threaded through it like veins, not medical grade, industrial. A small label beneath the case read, Relay Node 01 Prototype. It wasn't a black box, it was a receiver, a biological signal anchor. That's what they were hiding, I said. Traeger leaned in closer, the pulse increased. Behind us, something moved. She spun, dropped to one knee, rifle trained. Nothing. Just the echo of something shifting in the dark, slow, dragging. Not a footstep, a scrape, like something heavy being pulled over damp stone. I lifted my reader. It was flashing again. Receiving, receiving, receiving. Then the screen changed. Repeat active, mirroring primary node. The lights flickered. The prototype pulsed harder, its inner strands tightening like a muscle preparing to contract. Then we heard the breathing. Not ours. It came from the walls. Low, steady, rhythmic. Trager backed towards the door. It's not alone. I grabbed the case and followed. The door remained open, unmoving. The lights were dimming now, one by one, but the pulse from the box only grew stronger. As we crossed the threshold back into the corridor, I saw a shape form in the glass of one of the sealed observation windows, something standing behind it, watching. Not lunging, not moving, just present. A silhouette, the shape of a man, but stretched. Limbs too long, posture slumped. No face, just the impression of one, like someone had pressed a skull into wax and then peeled it away. We didn't wait. Traeger shoved the hatch closed. The moment it sealed, the lights above us shut off completely. We scrambled up the stairs, barely able to see. She pulled me by the strap of my pack until we reached the main level again. The depot was no longer empty. At the far end, past the shelves and barrels, stood 3 figures. Still. Facing us. Not moving. Traeger raised her rifle. I could feel her breath tighten. They weren't here before, she said. I looked through the scope. Their clothes were wrong, some sort of post-quarantine scavenger gear, cobbled together from uniforms and rags. Faces wrapped in mesh. One had a gas mask. Another carried what looked like a steel rod mounted with broken radio parts, antenna arrays that pulsed faintly with a red light. They didn't speak, they didn't signal, just stared. Then one of them held up something in his hand. Another black box, identical to mine. Traeger whispered, "That's not scavenger tech." I shook my head. "They're mirrors." The one with the box stepped forward slowly and placed it on the ground. No sudden movement, no aggression. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the ruins beyond the lot. The others followed. We waited 5 minutes before approaching. Traeger covered me as I knelt beside the new box. It was humming. Not loud, just constant. The display showed a message I didn't understand. Route verified, convergence active, 00340345. She asked, "What does that mean?" I didn't answer right away. I wasn't sure, but something in my gut told me it wasn't a location. "It's not where," I said finally. "It's when." The words came out quieter than I expected, like I was saying something I hadn't quite believed until it left my mouth. Traeger crouched next to the black box, eyes locked on the screen. The numbers hadn't changed. 00340345, a countdown, maybe, or a schedule. Whatever it was, the device was no longer passive. It emitted a low, steady thrum now, deeper than a typical power cycle hum. It was faint enough you didn't hear it so much as feel it, like a tremor in the teeth. Traeger stood and moved to the nearest window slit in the depot's east wall. The others, the men in scavenged gear who had left the box, were gone. No footsteps, no trail, just empty road stretching toward a tree line that never quite looked still. "We need to leave," she said, not even glancing back. "Now, if that's a convergence clock, we're inside its radius." "What's converging?" I asked. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. We'd both seen enough in the last 24 hours to understand the only thing worse than being surrounded by infected was being surrounded by silence, and whatever came just before the infected arrived. We grabbed everything we could carry. The original black box went into a pack. I kept the new one. Its weight was different, more balanced, like it had been designed for transport. It didn't have an external port, no interface, just the screen, the glow, and that rhythmic thrum. Outside, the light had dimmed again. Not a sunset, just a loss of clarity, as though something high above had drawn a curtain between us and the sun. We walked fast, keeping to the edges of the depot compound until we found an old rail cut running south. The gravel underfoot gave way to cracked tar and caved service trenches, but the line itself was clear. If we were lucky, it'd take us toward the outer rim of the dead zone. If we weren't, well, luck hadn't been with us so far. The first hour was uneventful, just long stretches of ruined track and the occasional scorched tree or rusted frame of a burned-out cargo hauler. Then, the box buzzed. Not loudly, just a short, sharp shift in tone. I stopped walking. Traeger turned, hand on her weapon, eyes scanning the horizon. The box's screen flashed again. Route verified, signals synchronized, 00450345. Clock's ticking, she said flatly. We kept walking, faster. Around a collapsed relay junction, we found remnants of a security station built from scrap metal and sandbags. Someone had tried to hold it. We didn't stop. The ground past it was layered with ash and cracked bone. Not a battlefield, an execution site. All the remains faced the same direction, knees bent, backs arched, not buried, just left where they fell. Not a single one had a weapon near them. The wind started to pick up around the second hour. The temperature dropped again, too fast, too much. Traeger's breath fogged as we walked, though it was still technically late spring. My fingers started to stiffen around the straps of my gear. She didn't say anything, but she kept glancing up toward the darkening sky. Every few minutes, the black box buzzed once, then fell silent. Each time it did, I felt something shift in the air, as if it were pinging something and something was pinging back. The box wasn't just marking time, it was navigating. By late afternoon, we saw the edge of the rail line curve around a sinkhole that swallowed half the valley. The pit was wide, with sheer walls of cracked clay and exposed concrete. At the bottom, the wreckage of an old monorail car jutted up like a broken ribcage. Something metallic glittered among the rubble. Traeger scanned it through her scope, then lowered the rifle. Bodies, old, maybe military, gears stripped. We skirted the rim carefully. The soil was unstable, brittle at the edges. A wrong step would mean a fast drop into what had become a grave for 30 or more. No signs of infected. No signs of scavengers either. Just birds circling high, far above the reach of whatever once crawled out of that pit. The black box buzzed again. 0103-0345. Proximity warning. Linked device active. Traeger stopped walking. There's another one nearby. Another black box. Or another anchor, a bigger one. We turned off the rail path and into a low field of half-dead brush. The sun had disappeared entirely now, even though it was too early for darkness. A haze hung over everything, a kind of thick, ashen fog that didn't move with the wind. It coated our jackets, settled in our lungs. My throat itched. The skin on my arms prickled beneath my sleeves. Traeger covered her mouth with a scarf. I followed suit. The farther we walked, the less I recognized about the landscape. The ground was wrong, angled in ways that didn't match the horizon. The trees grew in partial spirals, bark half shredded but still living. Birds circled overhead, but they never landed. We came to a facility just after dusk. A satellite dish jutted from the roof like a snapped spine. The building was rectangular, bunker-like, concrete walls, no windows, 2 entrance points. It was old world, military-industrial. Markings along the exterior had long since been scoured away by time and weather, but faint outlines remained. Relay Core 7, Lock Point Sigma. The name meant nothing to me, but Traeger tensed when she read it. I heard about Sigma, she muttered. Rumors, old reclamation logs, said it was buried for a reason. Inside, it was dark and quiet. We passed through 2 airlock-style doors that hissed as we forced them open. Dust filtered down in sheets from the ceiling above. Somewhere in the building, something hummed softly. Traeger took point. I kept my hand on the box, watching the screen. Link established, primary node engaged, 0137-0345. The time was speeding up, or we were getting closer. We reached a main chamber deep in the structure, a circular room filled with shattered terminals and broken chairs. At the center was a raised dais where a terminal still flickered, weakly powered. Behind it, embedded in the wall, was a mass of fiber and metal, another prototype, but larger than the one in the depot. This one was fused to the structure itself. Roots of wire and veins spread from its base into the floor, into the ceiling, into the steel supports like ivy. The device was pulsing, rhythmic, precise, not organic, but trying to be. It had a heartbeat. Traeger aimed her rifle. You think these were meant to control them? Maybe. I watched the screen again. Uplink confirmed, neural pattern found, initiating mirror sequence. The hum changed. The sound deepened, became layered. A secondary frequency started to vibrate the walls. Dust danced across the floor. Then a sound echoed through the chamber, a voice, not human, not machine, something in between. It spoke in a pattern, syllables repeated over and over, with slight changes between each cycle. Not speech, a code, a learning loop. Traeger backed up slowly. We shouldn't be here. I agreed. But something in me, curiosity or stupidity, stepped closer to the console. The interface displayed a waveform. It wasn't random. It matched the same patterns the infected made when they clicked. Same length, same shape. The black box on my pack began to vibrate harder. Then a third tone joined in. From behind us, we turned. In the corridor leading to the surface, figures had gathered. Infected. Dozens. Maybe more. Not moving. Not groaning. Just listening. Traeger froze. Don't move. I stayed still. The infected didn't come closer. They didn't look directly at us. They looked at the relay, at the prototype. They're here for it, I whispered. Then something happened I will never forget. One of the infected stepped forward, jerky, uneven, like every muscle had to be coaxed into motion. It knelt before the prototype and placed its hand on the wall beside it. The prototype pulsed, once. Then a matching pulse flickered in the infected's chest. Not visible at first, but real, like the remnants of a heartbeat, somehow mirrored in dead tissue. Another infected stepped forward, then another. Each repeated the gesture. The console changed again. Pattern stabilized. Vital response synchronized. Zone control integrated. 0158, 0345. Traeger whispered, "They're not hunting. They're being called back." "Reclaimed," I said. "Synchronized, like cells returning to a host." We needed to leave. Now. We didn't wait for full convergence. We backed away from the console, moving around the chamber's edge. The infected didn't react. Their focus was absolute. As we reached the corridor, I turned to look back one last time. The thing embedded in the wall, the prototype, was pulsing faster now, like a server straining under too many connections. There were at least 30 infected in the room, unmoving, standing like statues, each one with minor tremors in their hands or twitching fingers, as if receiving low-frequency stimulation. The lighting flickered in time with the pulse. Something was definitely broadcasting, but it wasn't supernatural. It was technological. Traeger moved ahead of me, and I followed, holding my breath as we passed within 10 feet of two infected positioned in the hallway outside the relay chamber. Neither turned toward us. They were upright, still, completely unresponsive. Their bodies weren't decomposed like the others we'd seen days before. They looked recent, weeks old at most. Their clothing was intact, layered for travel. One had a half-torn CDC patch on his jacket sleeve. I didn't know what that meant yet, but it stuck with me. We made it up the stairwell, closed the blast door, and kept moving. When we reached the surface, the sun had vanished behind dense grey cloud cover. It wasn't dark enough for night, but it might as well have been. The wind had picked up too, cold, fast, sharp. Dust whipped across the depot yard. Everything around us, trees, brush, fences, was still. No infected in sight, but I didn't trust the silence. We jogged through the outer fence gap and returned to the overgrown trail where we'd entered from the ridge. The box in my pack hadn't stopped pulsing. In fact, it was buzzing more frequently now, almost like a metronome. The screen had changed again. Link stable. Node chain confirmed. 03110345. "Still counting up," I said. Traeger nodded. She didn't break stride. We moved through the valley, cutting between rusted irrigation pipes and collapsed freight containers. No signs of pursuit, no gunfire, no screaming. Just that persistent hum behind us, faint and buried beneath the wind. We reached the edge of an old commuter rail bridge and ducked under the skeletal remains of its beams. There we found a vantage point, a good spot to catch our breath and get a look at the area below. That's when we saw it. "They avoided it," Traeger said. "That's not an accident." We dropped low and scanned the terrain. It wasn't just infected. On the southern edge of the site were 2 flatbed trucks, both burned out. Several bodies lay near them. One had clearly been shot, not chewed, not torn, shot. Blood had dried in a spray across the truck's door. Traeger checked the black box again. The screen was different now. Final node in range, system restoration pending, 0325-0345. I think that building was part of the network, I said. Maybe the final node. These infected, they weren't just spreading aimlessly, they were migrating, coordinated, returning to programmed points. Traeger didn't answer. She was watching the perimeter, tracking movement through the rifle scope. "There's someone inside that bunker," she finally said. "I saw a shadow cross the doorway." We made our approach carefully. No light, no sound. We reached the fencing line and slipped through a break between rusted barrels. The infected nearby didn't react. They stood at distances, 15, 20 meters apart, as if stationed, positioned, not aggressively, just placed. We didn't fire. We didn't speak. When we reached the main building, we found the front hatch sealed with an interior locking bar. Traeger banged twice, sharply, then stepped back. No answer. "Maybe it's automated," I said, "or locked from inside." We started circling the building. On the north side, we found a rear hatch pried open, deep scratches in the steel, probably from a crowbar. Inside, the bunker was dark, lit only by residual battery indicators on a backup power unit. We moved through the narrow hallway, past stacked crates of emergency supplies and dusty cases labeled Relay Equip Secure. I recognized the same logo from the earlier prototype, Lockpoint Systems. Whoever had operated this bunker had been part of the original infrastructure, not scavengers, not survivors, engineers. We reached a comms room on the lower level and found 2 bodies, both long dead. No signs of bites, no obvious trauma, just slumped in chairs, eyes sunken, bodies still strapped in. One had a sidearm holstered. The other still had an ID badge on his chest, T. Hargrove, systems lead. Next to him was a third black box, active, sync complete, network secured, awaiting signal clearance, 0343-0345. I turned to Traeger. They weren't monitoring for infected. They were monitoring each other. Redundant nodes. Each of these stations was relaying back status updates. And this was the endpoint. This was the final confirmation. Confirmation of what? She asked. That the system was complete, that the spread was total, not just the virus, the coverage. I opened the lid of one of the gear crates. Inside was a hardened drive, sealed in polymer with a label marked Biometric Failover, Gen 2. I didn't understand what it meant at first, but then I found the supporting docks stuffed between the crates, a printed manifest, prototype relay structure, biocompatible anchor interface with dormant viral encoding, no cellular agency required, no metabolic dependency, responsive only to pre-programmed signal strings, independent neural behavior mimicked but not enabled. Behavior is learned, repetition-based. Traeger leaned in close. Are you saying the infected were following a signal pattern, not instinct? Yes, I said. We always assumed they were decaying animals, driven by hunger and reflex, but it wasn't random, it was repetition. Something was embedded in the early stages, before the collapse, a protocol. The virus wasn't just biological, it was instructional, and these relay points were how it was reinforced. She looked down at the third box. Then what happens at 0345? I didn't know. We waited. The power system hummed faintly. No movement outside. I kept my eyes on the screen. 0344-0345, system stable, replication terminated. And then 0345-0345, zone sealed. Nothing exploded, no alarms, no change in the room temperature, but outside when we stepped back through the bunker door, we saw something different. The infected were still. More still than before, not watching, not waiting, just off. Their limbs hung slack. One leaned against a post. Another had collapsed backward into the tall grass. No movement, no breath, no twitch, no faint sound in the throat. Just motionless corpses standing like puppets with their strings cut. Traeger walked up to the nearest one, waved her hand in front of its face. Nothing. She pressed a gloved hand against its chest. "No response," she whispered. "No function. It's dead." I checked the black box again. Signal complete. System dormant. Containment status static. The system hadn't created anything new. It had ended what it started. It had reached capacity. There would be no final wave, no mass charge, no final horde. The virus hadn't died. It had shut down. Purpose fulfilled. Replication stopped. The infected were no longer receiving. We spent the night in the bunker. The next morning the infected still hadn't moved. Some had toppled over. Others remained upright like mannequins. I examined the nearest one in the daylight. No rot, no activity, muscles slack, heart tissue fully necrotic. Whatever had kept them going, some residual nervous activation, some form of low-level control, was now absent. Traeger and I crossed the perimeter around midday and didn't look back. We made for the relay tower near the western ridge, hoping to find a working transmitter. We didn't celebrate. We didn't talk about salvation, because deep down we both knew this wasn't the end of the virus. It was the conclusion of a cycle, a software patch, not a cure. The code had finished running, the system had stopped processing, and someday someone would send a new signal, even accidentally, and it would start again. That's all for now. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe for more unsettling creepypastas. Your support keeps my channel alive. Until next time, stay quiet, stay vigilant, and trust nothing, not even the silence.